Hope I'm audible to all of you. Thank you for sacrificing your deadlines, your priorities, to join us today. This is the second installment of a webinar series that we have on international finance institutions and how it impacts economic justice, which I think is a cause in all our walks of life that we are fighting for. So just to recall, the first webinar was basically an introduction to international finance institutions and how they work and why they operate the way that they do. And one of the main conclusions that we reached from that webinar was that while these international finance institutions are tasked with economic development, very often they act against the interests of the general public. Um, we see that in the way in which uh, their lending sometimes leads governments to adopt policies that are detrimental to the well-being of people. We see sometimes their lending leads to projects that displace people from their homes and from their livelihoods. And so this has become a matter of concern. So that was basically the first webinar. So with this webinar, we are hoping to shift a little bit towards action and strategy. Um, in particular, we want to focus on the kinds of actions and strategies that have been employed across the African continent, wherein activists have sought to challenge the power that international finance institutions have on our public governance and on our public finances. And given the recurring episodes of debt distress across the African continent, part of which is caused by the lending from IFIs, we really wish to draw lessons from elsewhere in the continent. So, in spite of the underdevelopment that many African countries continue to face, we see that they still, a big majority of them still spend um, a lot of their budget considerably on servicing debt than on spending on healthcare, education, and social protection. And yet, these governments continue to resort to borrowing from international finance institutions, despite their clear negative impact on things like policy sovereignty and on debt sustainability. But in recent years, we have seen a shift where civil society organizations from countries such as Mozambique and Zimbabwe have used the judicial system, taking the government to court to successfully challenge the opaqueness and the non-consultative uptake of foreign debt by their governments. And in other countries such as Zambia and Uganda, we have seen the law being used to essentially challenge the power that is held uh, by these international finance institutions. So, the current context in the global south is one of debt distress. We have seen this in the cases of Ghana and Zambia, who, with mixed results, have, been integrated into the G20 common framework, which has tried to restructure their debt. And in the case of South Africa in particular, we want to bring attention to the fact that despite very little surveillance from the public and from the parliament, the state has yet again taken billions of dollars in loans from the World Bank and from the African Development Bank, which if in a closer reading, you will see that these loans are basically in support of privatization of public services. Um, and so today we have brought forward an esteemed set of speakers. Uh, we have Riska Koopman from Afrodad, who is very hyphenated. She's a Pan-African intersectional feminist activist. So Riska is deeply interested in applying a gender lens to issues of debt and development in the global south. And she has gained experience and knowledge in working in the international non-governmental sector. And she has over 6 years experience in building, supporting, and shaping activists, learning, and civil society movements in sub-Saharan Africa, which have mostly been focused on issues of economic and tax justice. We also have Mukasiri Sibanda, who has over 10 years experience pursuing justice in tax and mineral resource governance. Mukasiri has worked in the Stop the Bleeding campaign and was a former chairperson of the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development. And then we have Usani Morgan, who's a climate change activist. So he's the founder of the Movement for Debt and Reparations, which is a Pan-African activist initiative advocating for just economies, climate justice, and an end to odious debt. Usani works at the intersection of economic justice and climate activism, building coalitions across civil society, faith movements, and youth movements. So before we get started, I think our comrade Mukasiri said he wants to share a word with us. Mukasiri, are you online?
Thanks, Liso. Colleagues, I've prepared a short poem for me, so don't mind me. I'll do bungee jumping into the conversation. You wanna give us a loan, leave us alone. See, debt is not evil, so they argue, but does it make it civil when it takes many to the morgue, but still we maintain the dialogue? Debt takes away paracetamol. It leaves us with parasitic moles. So we cannot talk about generating wealth with no generational health. Leave us alone. Don't give us a loan with clauses that closes our path to development. Thank you. So this is it, comrade.
Thank you. That was very nice.
You're welcome. The idea was just to show the contrast that we have, like in South Africa, your parasitic moles and no paracetamols, and
Yes.
that kind of flow development model.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for that spoken word, Comrade Mukasiri. I think we'll be sure to transcribe it and to share it with the rest of our networks. I think that's a very good note to open on to remind us of how damaging and insidious foreign debt is to the current workings of our public finances, and we really appreciate the word that you have given us. So bungee jumping onto it, I will just start with you here, Comrade Mukasiri, with a focus on maybe some case studies of some successful campaigns you can point us to. What have been the strategies and tactics that are currently used or that have been used in the past to challenge the power that international finance institutions hold over the global south and Africa in particular?
Yeah, thanks, comrade. How many minutes do I have?
Sorry?
How many minutes do I have? I need to time my contribution.
I will say you have 5 minutes, but just as an initial input, but we will be generous if you still want to go on.
All right, thanks. I prefer to start by prefacing this whole conversation so that we are on the same page. So what is debt? It's a form of addiction, because in your concept note, you highlighted that it's recurrent. It's a problem that we continuously we've faced over a long period of time. So you can sense the addictive nature of it. And I had to do a word search. Where does addiction come from? It was derived in the 16th century from a Latin word, which also meant that a craving, significant craving or a dependence on particularly alcohol. But it was tied then from the Latin translation to legally binding someone over debt. Because this kind of background makes us appreciate that we are not where we are by default. If you trace it back to slavery, when we said Africans, now we are no longer bound by slavery, who was compensated? It is the slave owners, not the slaves. When we said we had gained our independence, those that amassed wealth by plundering our economies, we said, oh, let's forgive, let's forget, but they keep getting. And then they moved to say, we can control the global financial architecture and make sure that we have a smart, a stealth form of slavery, which comes in form of debt. So I thought that that kind of prefacing is important. And it's the international financial institution who are the drivers of this. But behind them, we know there are countries that are controlling them. So sometimes we talk about the World Bank, we talk about the International Monetary Fund, but there are countries behind. There is the US. There is that hyper-imperial agenda that is there, which is designed to maintain dominance. So I want to tell a small story for you to get a picture of the global financial architecture, and particularly the risks that are posed by financialization. So I started working on mineral resource governance with Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association in 2011. So outskirts of Harare, about 30 kilometers, 40 radius. There is a huge mountain there. We used to pass it through going to another mining community where extracted. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we heard that a company was prospecting for lithium in that mountain. A year later, we heard that that mountain has been sold at the Australian Stock Exchange for nearly $500 million US. $500 million US. So while others are celebrating capital gains, their wealth from their disposing their shares, what happens in the balance sheet, in the books of the Goromonzi community, the Rural District Council, the local government? Zero. You look at the national budget statement, is there any impact, any reflection of this that has happened? Zero. So it is a mirror asset, a derivative asset that is being used. When I say a derivative asset, I talk about a mirror asset. If you hold a mirror to something, you see it in the mirror. Like a holder of equity is the one who claims to be the owner of mineral resources. So it tells you in economics that we claim to own our natural resources in Africa, but we do not have control. Because if we have control, we could derive probably economic benefits out of it. But it is those that are outside that are helped by financialization to control our economies. So just to understand it a bit, moving away from natural resources, imagine you approach a cotton farmer what you want to do is for you to add value. Don't sell your raw cotton, go into ginning, produce cloth. That's the other stage. And then you can also produce actually the garments, the clothes themselves, t-shirts, there's an example. But someone comes with a logo, the Nike logo. Someone comes with a logo, Gucci, or whatever it is. That t-shirt for $10 goes for $50. It's an intangible. It's an intangible. So the value is not for those that labor to produce cotton. The value is for those that control patterns, that controls branding, that controls what is it called? That the goodwill. So we have the global wealth has shifted from tangibles, the things that Africa prides itself with, to intangibles. When you talk about debt, your mirror asset becomes what is it called? A finance cost, interest. You see, someone, if you look at the value of these intangible assets as of June 2023, they were nearly about 715 trillion in form of equity, in form of foreign exchange, in terms of in form of finance cost, interest. And these are not real assets. So look at the game where the Africa's economy is based on agriculture. So I want to draw linkages as we have this conversation. Most African economies are dependent on agriculture. The top economies in Africa, you talk about South Africa, and this is an exception. But your Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, those are agriculture-dependent economies. So when we have natural disasters, climate change, extreme patterns, their economies are disrupted. Even Zimbabwe, it's also disrupted, and in many other African countries that rely on agriculture. And once the economy is disrupted, infrastructure is damaged, wealth is depleted, the taxable capacity becomes very low. It means that less tax revenue. So the climate crisis that we are grappling with, which we have barely no part in contributing to, but it is also depleting our tax revenue. Why am I bringing tax revenue into this conversation? It is because debt and tax are two sides of the same coin. Debt is a deferred tax burden. We borrow today because we need to pay back with the future tax revenue. We borrow because we do not have enough tax revenue. And when you need to pay back, we need to pay back with the tax revenues that are going for the future. So see that kind of relationship, that becomes the vicious addictive cycle. So the conversations now, moving on to what civil society have been doing, so that I also give the baton to others. I understand this is a relay, so I need to be mindful that I can't raise the whole course myself. So we have Texas Network Africa. We have got the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, and many other civil society organizations that I cannot mention now because of limited time. They've been pushing for the reform of the global financial architecture. And some of them, like Texas Network Africa and Global Alliance for Tax, they've been looking at it from a taxation perspective. How do we make sure that value, countries where value is derived from, economic value is derived from, you have a fair share in terms of ability to raise domestic resources to finance their development? Because that becomes a way to win yourself out of debt. You can only win yourself out of debt. So it's about also, in terms of strategies, understanding that, yes, at country level, significant changes need to be made. But these will never be enough if the global landscape remains inequitable. And just for you to know, to have a clearer perspective of my point here, look at what's happening in Palestine. We have the UN. it shows that the institutions have simply outlived their purpose. Every day you turn on the television, so many people have been killed, so much is happening, and where are the global institutions? So it's not only financial, it's also about peace institutions. The global institutions are not working for developing countries. That's the bottom line. So the last message I have for you is about humanizing the struggle. Normally, we get to be lost in technocratic spaces in terms of what really needs to be done and taking the agenda from the people who should own and control it. So that element of trying to humanize, simplifying, and connecting the struggles becomes very important. We are not talking about climate justice without talking about agriculture. We're not talking about agriculture if we're not talking about tax. We're not talking about tax if we're talking about natural resources. These things are so interconnected. Like if you, I'm not sure if part of you, many of you, but during my grade one, I used to wear a woolen jersey during cold. So a thread will be hanging. The temptation will be to pull that thread off.
Yes.
But I soon realized that you'll be left holding a ball of wool. So let's appreciate the interconnectedness of the struggle, that there is the simple solution of trying to pull a thread from a woolen garment cannot be done without destroying the whole fabric. These things are so interconnected. So allow me to end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mukasiri. Thank you so much for drawing to our attention that ultimately the struggle for debt and our addiction to debt is rooted in the faulty nature of the structures of our economy, many of which are still reliant on agriculture, are still reliant on the export of raw minerals, which so often whose ownership is foreign. And thank you so much for drawing the connection in our addiction to debt as the African continent and the capacity of the African continent to actually tax. Just as a follow-up, and maybe to you as well, Riska, because I know you've been involved in the Global Alliance for Tax Justice movement. Could you please point us to some of the campaigns or to some of the causes to which they have progressed at the global level, and maybe to the degree to which these have been successful?
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. My name is Riska Koopman. I'm with the African Forum on Debt and Development. To address the first question Lisa has posed, I think there are two things which are important for the Global Alliance of Tax Justice as well as other organizations which Mukasiri spoke about, which would be Tax Justice Network Africa as well as Afrodad. Two of the main campaigns have been the first one on a United Nations Framework Tax Convention, which seeks to move decision-making power over the global financial architecture from the global north rich countries, which are of the OECD, to the United Nations. And I think a lot of progress has been made in this regard. We have seen it being passed, and now we've seen also a lot of more progressive language being used. And we've also seen how Global South Feminist has really progressed in getting language which is moving away from gender neutral language in these policies forward. And then the second one is the sovereign debt mechanism, which is also wanting to move debt workout mechanisms to the United Nations. We have seen how, for example, both Mukasiri and Lisa spoke about the G20 Common Framework. We've seen how long and inefficient this process has been for countries like Zambia. It took up to 3 years to get to some sort of resolution. And we are also seeing how private creditors, especially from China, has delayed this process. And so the UN framework sovereign debt mechanism would be a better place to do this. And in the last month or so, we've also seen more progressive language around sovereign debt. We've seen that on the African continent, we've seen the Loma Declaration being extremely progressive towards debt accumulation. And then we've also seen the Compromiso de Sevilla being also paragraph 50 being progressive on debt, sorry. So we are seeing some progress. And I think we also have to keep in mind that the process is incremental, but the Africa group at the UN pushing for both reforms is working really hard, as well as the small island states. There was another point that I wanted to make in relation to the global financial architecture, is that Afrodad is working alongside our partners, especially the Finance for Development mechanism, to really progress these policies and to move it to a place where everybody has an equal say. So we want to address power imbalances also. Because we are seeing, for example, coming out of the fourth Financing for Development conference, a lot of focus has shifted again to international financial institutions. We are seeing this revival of the conversation about billions to trillions and the mass assets in trillions that IFIs hold. At the same time, Afrodad has done a lot of research, and you can look at our website and see the failures of this rhetoric and this narrative, because we do see that even though IFIs promote this, we've seen its failure. And I want to use a case study to kind of illustrate this. So what do the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and the New Development Bank have in common? That answer would be financing of Medupi. Medupi was said to be a engineering feat. And if you've ever gone to Limpopo and you just coming down the pass, you see this giant towering structure out over the plains of Lepelale. And Lepelale is said to be the last coal frontier. It is the last place where coal has been found in abundance. The quality of the coal is questionable, but coal nonetheless. And so these four banks have financed since the early 2010s Medupi. And I have shared a PowerPoint, which I'm sure will be shared with all the participants. This has been an engineering feat. It's been also one of the greatest failures in terms of project management, as well as large infrastructure projects of our time. In short, to save on time, it has resulted in the electricity price going from an average increase of 8% in 2007 to 14.7 in 2021. As of 2023, Eskom's total debt balance also stood at 442 billion. And what this means in real terms is that South Africans are having to pay these deferred loans, as Mukasiri said. And in 2025-26 budget, South Africans are paying 22 cents on every rand to debt repayments. And one of the mechanisms that IFIs use for development is using public private-public partnerships. But what this actually means is de-risking. And this is a tool that the finance institutions sell to us as a public good. It's good because it brings private investment into projects and therefore makes it scalable. However, what this means is that private sector takes all of the reward and all of the risk is moved onto the public sector. And we've seen this in South Africa. One of the conditionalities of this loan in the early 2010s for the World Bank, and at that time, Ban Ki-moon came outside and there was a huge protest, and he said, this is the last coal project that we'll be financing, and it will come with technology to make it less detrimental to the environment. Both were lies. It was not the last project. What has happened is that they have found ways to finance coal, to finance fossil fuels through the back door of the IFC. And you can also, I'll share a link after this in the chat. You can follow BankTrack and see exactly where IFIs are financing in the global south, what they are financing. You can even see down to local banks in South Africa as well. And so they also lied because the technology that they mentioned has never been installed. At a later stage, I think in 2018, a new loan was taken from the New Development Bank, a 8.5 billion loan South Africa took on from the New Development Bank to install this technology. It is now 2025, and this has still not been installed. The loan has been retracted from the New Development Bank, but the interest still stands because the money has been dispersed. A lot of corruption has also been attached to Medupi. And so, in terms of climate change, Eskom is now the world's largest polluter. And we have seen in South Africa, Eskom's 15 plants, the areas around it, the air quality has declined to pre-industrial levels comparable to Germany. Um, and Eskom has been granted exemptions from the minimum emission standards by the South African Constitution, and this is insane because the same report found that Eskom attributes to at least 2,000 deaths per year due to air pollution. And so what are successful strategies that we are using? And so I want to mention that Afrodad is a part of the Civil Society Forum on the New Development Bank. And a part of this is we've been tracking and looking at the New Development Bank and its investments, and this has led us to focus on Medupi in the last 5 or so years. And so we've used quite a few strategies. I'll mention them. So the first one is having an insider and outsider approach. So for this, we do meet with the New Development Bank. We attend their annual meetings. We push for 2 things there. We push for them to adopt a gender strategy, and then also for them to make publicly available the loan documents to see the conditionalities and the agreements. We take an outsider approach. We work with civil society. We do protests. We do social media storms. We do all of the outsider track things as well. So we combine those activities. We work in coalitions and movements. We work, obviously, this working group is a movement on its own, but we also work in broader movements and coalitions like the Fair Finance Coalition. We do research and advocacy. So we've done a few papers looking at the gendered impacts of not only this project, but other projects like ones in India. We also use and test their own tools. In 2018, we tested the New Development Bank's grievance mechanism with the community of Lepelale. And they failed dismally. We can also share that. We then did a podcast on this to gain more, to do like an awareness campaign. We also took parliamentarians to the site, and this was quite interesting because the Medupi had then become a national key point, and parliamentarians themselves, did not know about the loans. They did not know how they defaulted on the conditionalities and the terms of the loans. For example, the scrubbers, also the gross failures of the World Bank in their own policies to ensure accountability and progress of the project. And so we also take in that way a granular national approach. So then we do letters to the South African government saying, we've incurred all of these loans that which South Africans have to repay over this period of time. How are we holding these institutions accountable? In some ways, this has worked. We have seen the AFDB and Hitachi case going forward because of the gross failures of Hitachi to supply good quality steelworks, drums, things like that. And then we also take a macro approach, which was Mukasiri was talking about, not pulling the wool, but rather keeping it all together. So in the macro approach, Afrodad then continues to work with the CSO mechanism, continue to do work on GFA, the acronyms, Global Financial Architecture Reform. So we want to tie all of that work together. And we also work in other ways to keep, for example, the AFDB accountable. We attend their AGMs. We on working groups monitoring that bank as well. And so we do this transfer of knowledge and collective work to ensure that, we are not staying working in silos as well. And then in terms of the climate impacts, we do also want to draw those connections. And so we've been also hosting on the sidelines of meetings. For example, Africa People's Climate Assembly. We've just held a People's Tribunal in Malawi, looking at the impacts of World Bank loans in that country and IMF loans in that country and what people are really saying. So we do then break it down into certain claims. For example, with the tribunal, we did one on the gendered impacts, one on the climate impacts. So we do take these mixed approaches. And I think an important part of the work that we do is holding this collective memory, because we don't need to reinvent and restart the wheel. We can build on each other's work. And so a lot of it is coordination, and that's something that we often forget as a strategy. So that is some of the work that we do and the strategies that we employ. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Riska. That was incredibly informative, talking about the complementarity in the strategies using an insider and outsider approach, still attending the meetings of these international finance institutions as a way to gather information, as a way to build rapport, but still participating in protests alongside other civil society organizations. But especially on your point around Lipalale, I just wanted to note that we do have an activist from the community, Umamo Francina Nkosi. I'm not sure if she's still online. Francina, are you still on?
Yeah, so I saw.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, Mama. Thank you for joining the meeting. Perhaps you may have a word or two that you would like to add about the campaign that you have been waging in order to kind of force these institutions and force the government to put in place a system that will protect the air quality of your community, and how far you have progressed with that. Is it possible for you to tell us a little bit about that at this moment?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Liso, for the opportunity, and greetings, everyone. I want to first second on what Riska have just said, and thank you, Riska, for your presentation. Yes, I was the one who was guiding the parliamentarians, looking at the hotspots on what is happening, so that when they are in the parliament, no one should tell them a lie and say, Medupi have done much for the community, and yet they didn't. And what we have done is doing a health impacts research, looking at how Medupi have affected us all health-wise. And with that, the report will be out not long, I think end of July. The report will be out on the findings on how we have seen how communities are affected by the flying ash and all. And also for us, it was doing it in looking at how Medupi, since it have started, it haven't done much to support the communities because there are no projects and there's still a lot of unemployment. And when we tried to talk to World Bank just said we have given money and then we are not accountable. For us, it's just pushing to say all the IMF, World Bank, they need to do their accountability and also do their own verification of how the money have improved communities' lives. In that way, it will be easier for them to see that here is the loophole, and then they will be able to close that loophole. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Francina, for that very informative input. And we remain, obviously, as the civil society for the New Development Bank and other civil society organizations supportive of the campaign that you have undertaken to challenge the damage, that has been done by these institutions in your community and as well as in other communities across the continent. Coming to you, Uncle Sani, so yours has been, in a way, kind of a different approach because one of the campaigns which you have undertaken is to call for the Global North to cancel debt that is in the Global South, and for there to be a restructuring of some of the debt that the Global South has, with one of the goals being that it will open space for Global South countries to be able to invest in climate finance. Could you talk to us a little bit more about your thinking behind that kind of campaign and what gains have been made and what some of the hurdles have been?
So yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks to the previous speakers who have made phenomenal contributions. The subject, of course, is close to my heart. I've prepared my presentation, so I'll put in some
Yes,
fillers to address some of your
that's
issues.
okay.
Yeah. So as was said, I'm the founder of the Movement for Debt and Reparations. It's an activist initiative fighting for just economies across Africa and specifically in the Global South, but focused primarily on Africa. So first and foremost, it's a Pan-Africanist agenda, right? I'm going to highlight today how debt, especially from IFIs, have constrained African countries' ability to fight the climate crisis, and more importantly, what we as activists have done and can do to change that. I want to make the first admission that I'm an activist and not a technical expert on the subject. Prior to forming the Movement for Debt and Reparations, I was one of the global founders of the Debt for Climate movement, but I've since left that movement, although it professed to be located and to be run by and powered by the Global South. We were very, very dependent on Global North funding and Global North administration, which actually defeated the purpose. And I then discovered, I came to the realization that a Pan-African focused organization was more meaningful. And it's our objective to have a chapter of the movement for debt and reparations. In every African country, you will notice that on our logo it's a logo of a tree, but there are 54 leaves for obvious reasons. So I want to answer the questions that were posed to me in the concept note. How does IFI debt affect Africa's climate justice? So it's quite fundamental, right? African countries already pay more in debt service charges than they receive in any form of climate finance. In fact, this idea that Africa gets climate finance is you, you will concede that it's a bit of a joke when you consider that it's just more debt wrapped up as climate finance. Climate finance itself is often structured in ways that are lean heavily on debt and is loan structured instead of grant structured. And even when it's loans, it's not even at preferential rates that are meaningful, but at commercial rates. And this deepens our debt burden, right? Example, if you just have to look at Zambia's debt crisis, it left little space to finance or to fund climate resilient agriculture, despite the country being prone to floods and to droughts. Debt keeps Africa trapped, paying yesterday's loans instead of investing in tomorrow's survival. I found that realization quite profound. We are shackled with debt that is backward looking instead of forward looking. There have, however, been some successful campaigns and strategies that have addressed the issue of debt. The Jubilee 2000 movement, both the Africa edition and the global edition, was very, very successful in the early 2000s. It framed debt as a moral issue, which is what we want to be able to say, right? Because fundamentally, we want to hold a global north responsible for three important, I'm going to call them sins, for want of a better word, right? Whether it was Debt for Climate or the Movement for Debt and Reparations or other organizations that work in this space, we want to hold the Global North responsible for colonialism, for slavery, and for extraction without fair value, and then the externalities of the climate crisis. So they must pay and they must reward and they must pay reparations for slavery, for colonialism, and for causing the climate crisis. So it is a moral issue, right? But we're going to also make it a financial issue and we're going to make it an issue of development and growth. So debt is framed as a moral issue. There was mass mobilization across the world for the Jubilee movement, right? And there was international solidarity. Now, I don't like to focus too much on the numbers because the numbers change all the time and it's a distraction because we know it's huge, right? But in the Jubilee movement, they secured up to $100 billion of debt relief, predominantly for the Global South and for poorer countries. So this is very, very important that there's a template of success. Mozambique, though it was a scandal, it was referred to as the hidden debt scandal. The positive to take out of that scandal was that investigative journalism and litigation exposed 2 billion rand of secret loans, and there were arrests of people and led to the collapse of that government for all intents and purposes. But it was ordinary folk on the ground, activists like you and I on this call, and civil society organizations that did not feel intimidated or did not shy away from the challenge of taking on the government and these IFIs worldwide, and their effort led to the exposure of that hidden debt, which was then some good came out of it, I would assume. The Kenya Eurobond issuance, there were media campaigns, parliamentary hearings, auditors' reports exposed the mismanagement of that Eurobond facility. Again, activists in the forefront of the struggle. In Argentina, litigation against the voucher funds because they received loans. Some of the loans from the World Bank and the IMF were immediately siphoned away by the elites to Swiss bank accounts, but a lot of them also made its way out of the system and did not meet the intended objectives for the loans. This exposure of this was led by public pressure. It led so much to that, so much public pressure was brought to bear on the argument that eventually those loans were completely restructured on very favorable terms for the state and for the people of Argentina. This again speaks very, very loudly about the involvement of civil society and of activists not being intimidated because this is the World Bank or it's the IMF or it's the Western nations or it's their proxies. What tools do we have at our disposal to make sure that we can formulate campaigns, or that we can just hold our own governments accountable? But the parliamentary supervision of IFI loans should be a given. One would think that if a country exposes itself to tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions of US dollars taking on debt on behalf of its citizens, that there should be some oversight. But across Africa, it's not the case. Due to executive dominance, due to the lack of expertise, and due to the opaque nature of the loans itself. We must be able to push for stronger CSOs who support MPs with research and public pressure, as Riska was alluding to, is to go to these board meetings, to go to the parliamentary briefings, and to hold our authorities and hold our representatives accountable. The Mozambican scandal showed what happens when parliaments are bypassed, right? Because executives take it upon themselves to negotiate these loans in the interests of the elites and in the interests of a very, very narrow group of narrow objectives, even though in the public it seems to be forward-facing, but it's actually quite opaque. And if power is vested in very, very few people who can make those decisions, then that is the issue. What came out of the Eurobond issue in Kenya a few years ago is now that all loans have public oversight, and they have a way and a mechanism to hold the authorities accountable, and to make sure that there is transparency in the process. So the lesson to take away from the Mozambican issue was that civil society must demand laws mandating full disclosure and oversight, and must build MPs' capacity to act. So we must be able to go back to the Department of Finance and hold them accountable. There's various mechanisms in our constitution, in our laws, and in our legal framework that we have not successfully, or we have not effectively and efficiently managed. So what lessons can we take from our own South African experience? We need to be able to build broad coalitions beyond just the activists. We must include faith organizations, unions, and students. The labor movement and the working class is an untapped group of influence. We tried a number of protests outside of Eskom's offices, both in Sunninghill and at the Johannesburg office. Held protests together with SEFTU. Vavi was at one of the meetings. We indicated that could be a campaign that we can win. When I wrap up, I'm gonna talk about that campaign in particular. So build broad coalitions. We must link debt justice explicitly, as the first speaker said, to climate justice. Show people how it impacts lives, lands, and livelihoods. This idea that we can separate debt and we can separate climate justice, they're inextricably linked. In fact, it's actually the one and the same thing in my mind. We must push for legislation that requires parliamentary approval and transparency on all public loans. This is something that we ignore, right? So we talk about the sovereign debt, but we leave out municipal debt. We leave out Eskom's debt. So we must use the courts and the media strategically. We must expose illegitimate loans and hold officials accountable. We really must see people go to jail for their role in corrupt transactions. And then we mustn't shy away from connecting South Africa's fiscal debates to wider global South struggles and strategies. That's why Afrodad is connected to Latin debt and Euro debt. Because the debt struggle is a universal struggle, right? It's fundamentally a struggle of the haves and the have-nots. So I want to be able to say that debt is just not numbers on a spreadsheet, right? It's schools that can't be built, hospitals that can't open, and clean energy that never arrives. As climate justice activists, we cannot ignore the chains of debt that keep our countries vulnerable. But you also have tools. It's not a hopeless situation, right? We have our voices, our solidarity, and our creativity to challenge the IFIs and to demand justice. If Mozambique could drag hidden loans, secret loans into the limelight, if the Jubilee movement could make the Pope and the G7 listen, then so can we. We haven't really fully examined that. We have a missed opportunity, right? Many people don't know, or people know but don't act on this information. This is again a Jubilee year for the church, right? It's 2025, it's a Jubilee year, the next one will be in 2050, right? We should be dealing with the faith-based organizations, particularly the Catholic Church, right? To be able to promote this idea of debt cancellation. If you understand the Jubilee concept, for those who are biblically inclined, it means the forgiveness of debt. It's the freedom of slaves, and it's the returning of certain things to the land. So this is fundamentally important. The second issue that we've missed is that this year, in the April meeting of the AU, debt was made an apex project, right? So we need to be able to do that. So debt and reparations. Remember that some progress has been made on this issue of reparations. Reparations are fundamentally important. The Namibian claim for against Germany is under discussion at the moment. And on the 28th of May, just a few weeks ago, there was a commemoration of that genocide against the Nama and the Herero people. That reparations was successfully put on the agenda. Now the discussion is about the number because the Germans have offered 1 billion and nothing else. And then they should give Namibia 100 billion. So that is the conversation that is happening. So what we need to be able to do is to make this idea of debt and reparations a much bigger issue. So I want to give you an example. Riska mentioned the 440 billion rand that is owed by Eskom, right? Of course, government took off the Eskom balance sheet about 200 billion of that. So that's why you're going to see this idea that Eskom needs to charge another double. They must double the tariff before they can have enough money to pay off the debt. But there is this concept in our legal terminology or the common law of odious debt, right? So odious debt is a tool that we can use, but odious debt needs to meet 3 criteria, right? So we can say the whole of Eskom's debt is odious debt, and here's the criteria. 1, the debt must be so big that it can never be repaid. That's odious debt. 2, it must not have been fit for purpose. Riska, you remember you said that they took this thing to be new technology, to have scrubbers installed, to be non-polluting coal, but it did not work. In fact, the scrubbers were never installed, right? It will take another couple of billion, hundreds of billions to install the scrubber. So which means that the scrubbers will never be installed. So first point for odious debt, it must be so large that it can't be paid. Number 2, it must have not been fit for purpose. So fit for purpose is not just that their own technology doesn't work, but it's not leading to free or basic, higher amount of basic electricity. It's not leading to cleaner electricity, and it's a broken technology. So it's not fit for purpose when there are other alternatives. And then the third thing, which is not widely known, the third thing is there must be an element of corruption in the granting of the loan. Now in South Africa, we don't talk about the corruption internally, but David Malchus, who was the president of the World Bank at the time that loan was granted, in an SEC filing, the Securities and Exchange Control filing, at a meeting in New York, admitted under interrogation on record that loan that the World Bank gave, there were elements of corruption present. So we have the president of the World Bank indicating that they corruptly granted that loan. So it meets all the criteria for odious debt. Now we should just say, we should, so as I'm wrapping up, I'm telling you what one of our projects could be. One of our projects is to call for the cancellation of Eskom's loans, World Bank and IMF loans that have been given to Eskom because it's odious debt. It can never be repaid. It was corruptly done and it wasn't fit for purpose. But in order for that campaign to work, we will need a grassroots campaign. I'm going to just use it as an example. At the time I spoke to Vavi was 100% in favor of that. But we don't need 10 people or 60 people or 100 people to pitch up. We need tens of thousands of people to pitch up. But we also need to do the hard work, the legal groundwork, the idea of popularizing this idea of odious debt, linking it up to other odious debt cases around the continent, and then launch a campaign to declare that odious debt. But it's not a simple thing to achieve. This is the hard part, right? I only had 15 minutes to talk. I think my time is nearly up, but I want to leave you with a few things, which is basically our call to action, right? So a suggested call to action. We need to join or support existing campaigns. So I would encourage people on the call to look up the Movement for Debt and Reparations and join us. We are in negotiations at the moment. When I was still heading up Debt for Climate, I was able to establish through personal interventions 15 chapters across the African continent. We want to have 54 chapters on the African continent. So, but there are other campaigns. We can join Eurodad, we can join Afrodad, we can join the other campaigns. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you do need to put your shoulder to the wheel to make the wheel turn. So this is important, right? But we need to also talk to our MPs to pass laws that demand transparency and disclosure of all public loans. I like the work that BankTrack does. I like the work that the Fair Finance School does. Fantastic work, which must be supported. We must make sure that the money serves the people and the planet and not profit. And we can do this effectively. Then we must link our climate work explicitly to debt justice because the two are inseparable in Africa. And then the last thing, we need to tell our stories. And we need to tell our stories through art, media, and social networks to make the invisible chains of debt visible to everyone. And this is important because that's how we build our solidarity. So this movement is a nascent movement. It's recently started, but it's already serious work being done in other fora that complements the work of the organization or the NGO or whatever identity we are. But we're not the first to do this. Jubilee planted the seed many years ago. Latin-Dead, Afrodad, and Eurodad are doing phenomenal work. I'm part of the group that meets regularly to discuss debt justice around the world, including with debt justice in the UK. So ultimately is to build this movement, and even if it's 10 years in the making, we will have the debt cancelled, and society is moving, young people are moving, and the zeitgeist moment is moving towards debt cancellation and reparations in its entirety for the evils of colonialism, slavery, and for causing the climate crisis. Thank you, guys.
Oh, thank you so much, Uncle Sunny, for such a wonderful and detailed and extensive input. I think everyone has gained substantially from that. Just to say, I think there was the wonderful harmony in the message that you're sending, in the fact that foreign debt must be framed as a moral issue, with the message that Mukasiri was sending as well, that we must humanize the struggle around foreign debt. It's important to not get caught up in the numbers and the technical details. And then to the point that you were advancing around reparations, just to point out also that the Afrodad, I think the theme for AFCOD this year is around reparations, especially geared towards climate finance. And on parliamentary supervision and monitoring, Afrodad, alongside, I think, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy has done great work on scaling the continent in terms of how parliamentary supervision actually works. And we would be happy, I think, even Riska, to share those papers with the rest of the group. But thank you so much. I think we can use perhaps the next 20 minutes for the audience to lodge their questions towards speakers, and to just open it up for further discussion, just the next 20 minutes, if that's possible. Please go ahead and open your mic and voice the questions that you have, or if you don't want to do that, you can paste your questions on the chat, then we'll relay them to the rest of the webinar. Tara, Shazia, have we got any questions yet from the audience?
Not yet. I think I had posted a question to Riska just around the 22 cents, but I think Riska responded in the chat as well, but I don't know, maybe Riska, you want to expand a bit on that?
Sorry. Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Tara. So let me just find the question. I think when we're speaking about Eskom's debt, and I think, thank you so much, Uncle Sunny, for that framing of ODS debt. So South Africa's state-owned enterprises are the bulk of our sovereign debt. And so the amount of debt owed by Eskom alone, and I mean this is also after some debt forgiveness or bailing out by government, is a large proportion of our total debt stock, right? And so that 22 cents on every rand, a large portion of that then goes towards Eskom, and that is the case. I think maybe we can tie into ODS debt. And then just to also think about the fact that, for example, with the Eskom Medupi case, 4 IFIs were involved, and in each of those we can see elements of not fit for purpose, corruption, and the amount of debt then becoming so big a burden that we can't as a country sustain it. And this debt was taken on in the first place under the premise of energy security, not only for South Africa but for the region, and that was seen as a developmental priority at the time. And what it's turned into is a country indebted, in shackles. The community of Lephalale live on the doorstep of not one but 2 power stations and one of the largest open cast coal mines, which is Groot Geluk. And I'll share my presentation with you. These people do not have access to electricity. They are still using paraffin. They are using, and they don't, and the water has been polluted. Children can't go to school. Their eyesight has been negatively impacted. In the time during the construction phase of Medupi, for example, the local area had been doubled in increased laborers, but the local communities still say that they do not access those opportunities. We see corruption through the value chain. We also see how the ANC and Itachi had a corrupt relationship, and this put at the core, put the financing and the timeline for this project at such a disadvantage that the cost of the entire project ballooned to billions in the end. So the entire project on its own has led South Africa not to energy security, but further away from it. Thank you so much. Oh, so also to answer Mukasiri, I think there's a report by Fair Finance Coalition, and I just want to read some of the quotes coming out of that report. And these are from real people living on the doorstep of Matupi and Matimba. We do not benefit anything from Matupi. Only thing we get is diseases. And this is to note that Lepelale is now the largest or biggest hotspot for new HIV infections amongst the age of 21 to 34. HIV. Our main issue is water. We can go up to a week without water unless you have a private borehole. When I last visited Lepelale, it was 12,500 to get a borehole for water. So these are the conditions that people are subjected to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Riska. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
I have a question to the audience. I've typed
Please
it.
go ahead.
Yeah, because we
Please
need
go
also
ahead.
to.
Then afterwards, we will have Alex.
Yeah, we need to hear different perspectives. Like, how does the interconnectedness of public, corporate, and individual debt affect us? Why does it matter to deal with these burdens simultaneously? And the second one is, if we look at the symptoms of addiction, you are talking about lack of self-control, neglection of responsibility. There's a lot of secrecy. There is a lying to protect the supplies and justify the kind of addiction. And how do we relate this with the manner in which we are governed and grapple with these challenges? Then the last bit of it is there is a fiscal social contract between those that govern and the governed, the reason why we pay taxes. And we can't talk of any budgets in any participatory manner when we are now paying more towards servicing debt than we are investing in the people. It means that as citizens would have lost control of our resources. So how do we grapple with this challenge of leadership that sort of like they've abdicated their responsibilities? Because if you are running such a scheme, that's what we call, what is it called? There's no going concern in such a business. So where do we draw the line to say the government is now dysfunctional? Thank you.
A wonderful set of very complex questions, Mukasiri. I'm not sure if there's anyone in the audience that wants to take on all of or some of those questions. I think Mukasiri is putting it up for discussion. So we can please go ahead.
Can I propose that we take the questions as well from Alex and Francina?
Okay. Please go ahead, Alex. You was first, and then we can take it from Mom Francina.
Hi, comrades. I hope you're doing well. Thanks so much for this. A very interesting and important conversation. A question I had was, I think often when it comes to debt, to draw on the metaphor of the interconnected sort of woven shirt, it feels like it's an interconnected set of chains kind of holding us down, right? And it feels like the more that we try pull on one chain to free ourselves, they tighten the other ones to keep us locked in. And unfortunately, it seems in South Africa, with our president, a big part of his push is constantly more foreign direct investment, more debt. And so the political current seems to be to endure more chains rather than less. So I'm just wondering because there is this, even with odious debt, there's this threat of, a sort of retaliation from the big global financial powers should we try to push for odious debt. So what are the chains that we can strategically throw off? How do we strategize and prioritize in a way that can lead to actually throwing off the chains rather than getting roped in further and punished for daring to challenge the indebted chains that we're in? So it's a very big question. I think maybe it's just a question around strategy and prioritization and what are the biggest chains we should be focusing on, perhaps. But yeah, thank you so much. This was a really great conversation.
Thank you, Comrade Alex. Mom Francina, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you to all the speakers. Let me try and
You can go ahead, Mom Francina. I see your hand.
yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm trying to answer the question. For me is that to connect is that if we look at all the provinces that have mining in them, is that communities suffer the same. And when they suffer the same, there's corruption in it where there are no services, you know. That's why for me, I would say everything interlinks. And then when it comes to my area at Lephalale, we did have MECWEP, the Mokolo Dam project. The MECWEP one was done, but it didn't benefit communities with water. And now they were proposing MECWEP 2, which also they didn't look at it to benefit communities, but it was all about the scrubber. But now, as we speak, Medupi pollutes freely without any scrubber. It means we are in a high rate of pollution due to Medupi. And when we try to raise that, they tell us no. We still trying to look at how we can get water so that we can be able to install the scrubber, while knowing that even when they were doing it, they were not thinking about putting it. I want to pose a question to Uncle Sani when he said cancelling of that debt. How do we connect as communities on the ground, not saying Lephalale only, but to the campaign in making sure that the debt can be cancelled? What do we need to do? Because already we have started. Because for me, I feel that the first step is making sure that the communities understands what is the debt and why are we suffering this way. Because without doing that of the awareness, we won't be able to win that. And then also, how do we hold Eskom accountable? For me, it brings back the greening Eskom on pushing the campaign to all provinces in making sure that we suppress Eskom in adopting that renewable energy is a way to go. Because for us here is they think that generating electricity with coal is a way to do it, but most of communities don't have. I'm talking about me also, doesn't have electricity, but yet I'm affected by the pollution. Thank you. Let me not take up much time. Thank you so much.
Can I ask
Thank you so much, Mom
Francina's
Francina.
question?
Yes, you may go ahead and respond, Uncle Sania.
Thank you. Thanks, Francina. Really great question. And it's a simple, the answer is quite simple at the moment, right? We're still busy building the numbers in the movement. And it's a collective movement because we are a member of the Climate Justice Coalition. So I speak about building the broader climate movement, but the joining of our campaign, the movement for debt and reparations, is going to rely on having suitable numbers that appear as our membership, but that can take on the responsibilities. And we want a national body. We want a body that's representative across South Africa. But South Africa is made up out of these marginalized communities or affected communities. So it would be great if the Lepalala community can join. Our way of popularizing the movement is to talk exactly to those issues. What is debt? How does it affect me? And why are there no schools? And why am I not connected to an electricity grid? Or why don't I have a renewable energy farm in my area? So we do that by building solidarity at grassroots level. Insofar as that we must go to schools and talk to it. We must go to churches and talk to it. Ma'am Francina, I'm going to send you a message offline, but I'll also post something in the CJC group so that we can find out how to contact us. It's very, very simple. Our email address is info@m4z, m4dr.org. But I'll put it in the group now, and I'll also put it in the chat for now, and then we'll send you a pack, which is an info pack as a preliminary step. But then when you're ready, you invite us to your community, and we can come and talk. So we have to build grassroots numbers, but we have to build solidarity, and that means we have to show up at other people's protests as well. You know, all the normal things apply about how do you build a movement, how do you craft a campaign, how do you get resilience, how do you get noticed. All of that will apply, but we're still in the infancy of it because we think that this is an important movement and it's the right time to establish it and to take it forward. Thanks. I'm putting the email address in the group now. Thanks, Comps.
Thank you so much, Uncle Sani. Is there another question that the speakers would like to take on or to pose to the audience?
Riska had a hand up.
Hi, yes. So it's not a question, it's not a full answer. But I think when we start thinking about how do we trying to address Alex's
Yes,
question is
please
quite a
go ahead,
big one,
Riska.
right?
Sure.
So I think that we should be trying to not see things as one chain at a time because they're all interlinked, they're all interconnected, and we need to use this coordinating power to kind of strategize collectively and come together and say, well, I'm better versed at this, or we can do this together. Because you have to have this multi-pronged approach. So, for example, Tax Justice Network could be busy working on a framework convention on tax justice to ensure that countries have taxing autonomy, also digital taxation rights, all of those things. And then a Stop the Bleeding campaign can be focusing on stopping illicit financial flows. IHA can be working on powerful research and policy briefs. Uncle Sani's organization can be focused more on building those connections, and Francina bringing people to where we need them to be. So it's really about, and I say this also being very cognizant of this fast changing geopolitical landscape we're finding ourselves in, with shrinking civic space, with shrinking funding. We need to find ways to be creative, but also collaborative in our approaches. And we are also, Alex, I think, as countries seeing this deepening of extractivism across the global south, whether it be agriculture, mining, and the impacts that this has on women, girls, and communities has been well researched. But how do we turn this research and our findings into real political messaging to bring people together? So there's lots of things to think about, but I do think that we are on the right path of doing this collectively. Thank you.
I think that's a great response, Riska. Thank you so much for that. Um, are there any other questions we can take from the audience? Going once, twice, and yeah, I think this is we're already way beyond time. Um, but thank you so much, first of all, again, to the coordinators of this webinar, the Climate Justice Coalition. Thank you so much to our lovely speakers, Mukasiri, Riska, Uncle Sani, and to a guest speaker, Umam Francina, who I think added valuable inputs. And thank you so much, obviously, to the audience for being so attentive and being so engaging. What I think we can commit to possibly is that in the next maybe 2 or 3 weeks, we will have a summary of this meeting. With all the points that were made, and we will be able to share some of the presentations that were shared by the speakers to the rest of the to the rest of the audience. Shaz, please come in. I see your hand.
So I was also going to say that we will have the recording of this this webinar on YouTube, and I'll share the links to that as well.
Yes, yes. So there'll also be a recording on this. And I obviously see I think there's been some synergies we have discovered, and I hope we build upon that because a great deal of our work is very connected, even though we are maybe in different organizations. So I hope we are able to build on that, share our contacts, and participate in each other's campaign, because that is essentially what is needed, support and solidarity, because a lot of the work is already underway. It's a matter of supporting the causes with whatever skills or powers that we have. But unless there's anything else, let me just check the chat. Anything else, I am happy for us to close the webinar. And again, final thanks to everyone for being here today. Thank you. Closing off now.
Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.